So this clip is from a few days ago, but I had to comment on it because it says so much about the culture at Fox News and in mainstream media. They're going to talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez here. Look at what they say.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she says that she's having a hard time with something. Do we have it now or should I wait? Okay. Let me know when we have it. So Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says this: I have 3 months without a salary before I'm a member of Congress. So how do I get an apartment? Those little things are very real. She said this to the New York Times. What do you think of that?
It's very Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to say this. I think her supporters like it. This is who she is. She comes from the Bronx. She's young, youngest member of Congress. It's tough to get an apartment in D.C. I also think she's not alone. She might be the only one talking about it, but a lot of congressmen in Washington, D.C. say, given the cost of living there, it's not exactly the Washington.
I think that quote was preceded by a year and a half ago. I was tending bar in Brooklyn or something, which is true, by the way.
Well, that's playing to her base. But the fact of the matter is, Washington, D.C. and the greater metropolitan area is the most expensive county in the world to live in America now. So I think what she's talking about is all of the money in Washington, all of the wealth in Washington, all of the power, and a little simple person like her from New York can't find a place to live. It is a brilliant political lie.
On the other hand, her resume that Shelby just mentioned about being from the Bronx, it turns out when you read deeper, she had a lot more formative years in Westchester County, New York, which is a little ritzier than the Bronx. I'm from New York. I don't want to throw stones at any boroughs or counties, but her resume doesn't always match up. And some of those shoots during the campaign, she had these multi-$1,000 outfits that could pay a month's rent in Washington, D.C. You're right. Well, I live in Washington. It's very expensive, but she's been all over the map on some of this stuff.
Okay, so no, she hasn't. She hasn't been all over the map on this stuff. And she responded to this segment. Take a look. On Twitter, she said, "Why can't any of your anchors say my name correctly? It's been 5 months." Then she said, "It is bizarre to see 1% salaried anchors laugh at the U.S. housing crisis. And 3, never purchased pricey clothes and always told my story. But repeating lies until they are believed is your thing." Yeah, so she's right about all that. There was this incredibly hacky thing done by a far-right outlet where they were like, oh, she says she's basically like a poor girl from the Bronx. Well, look, she also spent half of her time in Westchester County in this house. And they literally showed like a, like the Google Maps picture of her house. The house was very modest. It's not like they were showing some fucking 3,000 square foot, like, gorgeous fucking thing. It was like a small house. And by the way, it's in northern Westchester, and in northern Westchester, the cost of living isn't nearly as much as in southern Westchester. So this case that they're making of like, she's actually a very privileged person. No, she told her story the entire time, and her story was, hey, listen, I've experienced middle-class living. That's when I was in Westchester half the time. And I've experienced, being lower class and living basically at the poverty line, and that's when I was in the Bronx. So I understand how much material well-being matters in a person growing up. And I understand that these are things that, nobody should have to live in poverty in America. So in other words, she's using her personal experience to say, hey man, I've seen both sides of the equation, and I know the reality of the situation, and we really need to basically have a strong social safety net and make sure people don't live in poverty. So they acted like she was trying to hide the fact that half the time she lived in northern Westchester. She didn't try to hide that at all, not even close. So it's amazing that they're still running with this lie. And then it was also a lie about the clothes. And then, yes, the main point is, come on, man. You heard the people at the beginning of the clip there when they're talking about how she can't afford the apartment. There's like smiling and chuckles and laughter. And it was like, oh, she can't afford an apartment there. It's like working class people. And listen, maybe some of them are too far gone and they're watching Fox News and they're going to agree with them no matter what the fuck they say. But an actual working class person watching that is going to go, that's nothing to laugh at. Why are you laughing? Why are you giggling? It's actually a very relatable thing and she's the only one who is open enough to talk about it. There were, I think, a few people on the Fox panel who were basically trying to be like, no, seriously, it's like a really expensive area for her to live, so it's understandable. But most of the people on the panel were just like snide assholes about it. And yeah, they're mega rich. And I mean, this is just a clear example that they can't relate to people. You know, I remember there was one time where I was on unemployment, and I worked as in the car business for a little bit as a car salesman, and then I ended up leaving there. But then there was basically a gap where I wasn't sure what I was going to do before I decided to try to do this show full time, and there was a period there where I was on unemployment. And I remember at the time the distinct feeling of like the idea that people think if you give people unemployment that it like takes away all their ambition, that is such a bullshit argument. Because you get, I forget the exact amount of money that it was, but it was, I don't know, $300-$400 a week or something like that. And you're like, okay, number one, this isn't much. Number two, you still wake up every day and you're like, what exactly am I going to do with my time, and what am I going to do with my future? So you still have all these like really strong, burning existential questions that are consuming your mind, and it's a very uncomfortable place to be in. And the overwhelming majority of people who are on unemployment are feeling that same thing. So the idea, this like right-wing notion of like, oh, you give them a little bit of help and like that's all they're going to do is the rest of their life they're just going to keep taking unemployment and they're going to leech off the taxpayers. And that's, I mean, it's utter nonsense. And by the way, the unemployment benefits at a certain point run out anyway. So, but the point is, they don't know how to like put themselves in somebody else's shoes. They don't know how to think like, okay, seriously, what if I was actually in that position? And if they actually think about it and they're like, no, if I was in that position, of course I wouldn't be comfortable just waking up and saying, yeah, whatever, $300-$400 a week is good enough. And fuck no, they're not going to think like that. Of course they're not going to think like that. So it's amazing how little they're able to relate. They really are deep in that establishment DC mainstream media bubble, and it's pathetic. And I'm happy Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responded. And she's right that not only does it show how out of touch they are when they do the fucking chuckling at the housing issue, but also the fact that it is 5 months and they can't pronounce her name.